You've just heard in the gospel that you'll need to be pruned, and for some people this is the pruning they get when you come to Mass. So you've got to listen to a homily for the next 10 minutes or more. Now a little phrase, and hope and probably not make any sense to you when you hear it first. Dying or death is an imaginary loss of an imaginary self. Now, some of you are looking perplexed. Death is an imaginary loss of an imaginary self. Most of us, for most of our lives, live totally separate selves. Totally separate selves. You are you, and I am me. And we live that way. And instead of being one, we end up many. Instead of being one, we end up many. And the call in the gospel today is to be one, to be attached to the vine. And most of us, a lot of the times, we are detached. And so the little self, our little self, and I use the plural because I include myself in this, our little self becomes the all-important thing in our life. And so we get upset if somebody doesn't pay us proper respect. We get upset if somebody looks the wrong way at us, depending on how sensitive we are and how much the little self or the false self plays in our lives. And so we need for a moment to find some kind of a definition of the false self, the illusory self, and the true self. And the false self is the role I play, that I have been for myself, or the opinion that I have of myself. All these are characteristics, if you call that, of the false self. And the true self is who you always, from all eternity, have been in the mind of God. From all eternity, God had you in mind. And so your true self in the mind of God, not the opinion or the role you have created for yourself. Now look at that seriously, and you'll find that because we live separate lives, separated from the vine, all the stupid things we do and the sins we commit and the lies we tell and so on are all directly part of the false self rather than the true self. We become detached from the vine. And so we live very separate lives. And so we kind of are judgmental, and we don't maybe like our neighbor, and we are all the things that apply to the false self. So that's why Jesus kept saying time and time again, you got to die in order to find your life. And what is the real life? What is the real life that Jesus is talking about? It's being one rather than many. It's being part of the communion of saints, and that's what we call heaven. Rather than our crazy ideas most of us have of heaven being some place. It's not. It's here and now, and it's for all eternity. And that's why St. Catherine of Siena said, if you're not in heaven now, you never will be. Which is, something most people don't believe. Heaven is not something that happens hereafter. You're either in heaven now, or you never will. You never will be. Strange to say. You're in heaven now when you're part of the communion of saints. And so I presume you have come to Mass this morning to receive communion. To receive communion. To be one with Christ. And when you're one with Christ, it affects your whole being. Now, if you look at where we are today, I don't know exactly where you are, but some signs. Don't you find today that many people are totally disconnected? When I'm out walking, young and not so young are all walking around now with plugs in their ears and wires coming down here, listening. I don't know what the hell they're listening to, but they're going around. And I invariably say, if I meet anybody, I say, "Good morning," and I just get a blank look, because they're not in reality, and that's where God is. Reality and God are the same thing. So they're walking around. I was talking to Clem a while ago, and he said, it's a fascinating statistic that most young people today between the age of 18 and 35 spend 7 hours, 38 minutes on the iPhone or iPad on the every day. And I was surprised that it was so little time. I thought it was much more. I really did, looking at, so many people. And so many people walk around with their iPhone like this. Especially when I'm walking, you see people stopped at a traffic light and they're texting. Hope you don't do that. You'll be better off driving under the influence of alcohol than texting. Seriously. Because you're totally distracted, disconnected. And we need to be connected to God most of all. So, putting that into reality then, or into practice, how would you live connected to God? Well, look at your normal day. When you leave here and you go back out there, how do you behave? We'll go and stand in the parking lot and you'll see. When you're driving, how do you deal with that? If you're stopped at a traffic light and the person in front of you doesn't move fast enough, do you sit there patiently? No. I actually, because I'm not used to driving here, and in the United Kingdom people are very courteous on the road. So if somebody's waiting to come out of a side road, never more than 2 or 3 cars will pass without somebody stopping and say, go ahead. And then the person that goes ahead will always give you a thank you. The number of times I've stopped here to let somebody out, and the person behind me honks on the car, is honking at me, and the person here is looking at me as if I'm crazy. And I think, well, no point in doing that. Can you see how disconnected we have become? And we really need to be, totally connected. And there's a little parable that fits in what we're talking about today, and it's the parable of the pencil. Tina said to me before Mass, don't forget your prop. So I got my prop in my pocket, and it is a pencil. Because I need to take notes because my homily is so good. Look at the pencil. The inventor of the pencil said to the pencil 4 things. He said, your true worth or your true goodness lies within you. Yeah, your true worth or your true goodness lies within you. As you go through life, you'll need to be sharpened. You need to be pruned. Number 3, you'll need to be in somebody else's hand, otherwise you'll make a horrible mess. And number 4, you'll be expected to leave a mark. So what was number 2? Good girl. You're right. Number 2, you need to be pruned, you need to be sharpened. How true that is. And since God is the vine grower or the gardener, as we go through life, we too need to be, we need a little bit of sharpening now again. And so suffering is a very important part of our life. And there's always a reason for that we sometimes don't see. And sometimes it takes us a long time until we eventually look back before we can see the reason for this or the reason for that. That's part and parcel of life. And we're expected to live in love. That's the real secret. And real love costs. It means not putting the false self always first. Not thinking along the lines, what's in it for me? Would I profit by doing this? And you've got to be totally, if you're a true follower of Jesus, you've got to be totally different out there. Not like everybody else. Very often you can see it. It's all about me, 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 me. And so if you're as avaricious as anybody else, and you're always seeking yourself and for yourself and to promote yourself and so on, then you're not living the true life. You're not attached to the vine. Now, some people are beginning to nod, so I better stop. It reminds me of the story. There was a priest preaching one Sunday at Mass, and he went on and on and on. And when Mass was finished, and he was standing at the back of the church, a little fella came up to him, and he handed him $1 bill. And the priest said to him, "Oh, son, don't give that money to me, give it to the poor." And the little kid said, "Father, that's why I'm giving it to you. Because my dad said, you're the poorest preacher we ever had in this place." So on that note, I'll finish. So that's thank you.